A judgment is without mercy to him who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. And you can see that James has spent the first half of the chapter watching a church arrange a room. A man enters wearing a gold ring, fine clothing, and then everybody moves around to seat that man according to his clothes, while another enters a poor man who has nothing to his name into the church. He is told to stand over there or sit beneath somebody's feet. The church has not denied a doctrine at all, if you can see the second chapter of James, where it starts from here and so on. It moves down the drain into the same concept over and over again. But it has revealed a gravity. It leans toward the person who can return the favor and pushes downward the person who cannot. And then after, in the end, James says mercy triumphs over judgment, and without changing the subject at all, he moves forward into talking about faith and work, which is the usual debate, or rather where people start the debate, although they are starting it too late. They are starting it around 14, but it's seemingly one topic over the whole chapter. And that is what I'm going to talk about today. Starting by verse 14, what good is it, my brothers, if a man says he has faith, but has no work? Can faith save him? And you see, James does not place a living faith on trial at all and asks whether it needs to be supplemented. He gives us a man reporting faith. About himself, we have not seen the faith. We have heard the claim, and the question that follows in Greek expects the answer to be no. In Greek, the word usually would be after that something like me dinatai pistes sosai oton, which means can the faith save him? The faith we have just met as something said and nothing more. Can faith save him? That is the 14th one, but rather it can be seen as a faith that was introduced by a heresy. James is repeating this sentence. What good is it, my brother? The what good is it, my brother is the Tito or Philos, not is the sentence correct, but rather did the speaker mean it? What good crosses the distance between one body to another? Even before trying to respond, when we look at the first chapter and the second chapter, it looks like he had made it impossible to answer, for every good and perfect gift comes from above. He is still maintaining that over and over again, for that God only is the one who gives the gifts. Then by the second chapter, the work in that chapter, do not climb upward and force God to give birth to a baby, for instance, or to give life. For rather, God comes first to us. He gives us life, and then we are capable of breathing. And this is the life whose movement James is about to examine, because the question is not whether faith or work starts the life. It's impossible to ask that question because we know God does. The question is what the life looks like once it is given. For the verse 15 and 16, it's about the blessing that gives nothing. For if a brother or sister is naked, and then you tell him, go in peace, be warmed and filled, yet you didn't give him the things the body needs. What good is it? This is, again, go in peace, keep warm, eat well, verbs that travel in a comfortable way to a person who is exposed to a hardship, yet clothe him not. The speaker occupies the position of the giver, the one who has and the one who gives. Yet in that position, he has given nothing, nada. This is why the connection to chapter 1 matters, and one needs to actually read chapter 1. It tells us that God does not merely announce life, he gives birth. Here, a man imitates the posture of the one above him. A man is trying to imitate the posture of God. But then, in trying to do so, he announces life. And God gives life, while this man gives air. It is a counterfeit descent. God from above gives us. That man he is, in the below, tries to give to another man nothingness. This is again the same question that was asked, Tito or Philos. We could translate it in a strict, direct manner. What changed for the person who heard you? The answer is nothing. And that is the whole problem, because coldness is represented into something like that. A prayer can be the deepest thing you give when nothing else is yours to give. James has chosen a person who can give what the body needs, and he does not give. The problem always was with the use of the spiritual language without the actions meeting that, or we always asked, what good is it? And then in the 17th, even so, faith, if it has no work, is dead in itself. This says the first death in the whole few verses here. James is not moving from an illustration to a different argument. It's the same. The empty blessing is the anatomy of faith. The word keeps warm. The usage of the word keeps warm in these verses resembles care, because care would also want the person warm. It may retain the noun, for rather they lack. Usually what they lack is the movement that would make the resemblance live in. So too with faith. It's not rather an argument on how people are trying to make it seem like. For the Greek, for instance, is nekrakath, huton, dead by itself, isolated, and dead by itself here. James is not giving faith and work competing differences, or rather percentages, as if salvation were a mixture and the argument were over how much of each to pour. This analogy would not let it pass, and you would see that faith at full volume works at full volume, not two prices paid to God, but rather one life in its inward and outward reality. Paul has the language for this too, in a way or another, for he says, faith working through love, not faith replaced by love, and not love executed by faith. Faith working, faith breathing through love. The 18th. It talks about, yes, a man will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without works, and I will show you my faith by my work. And that was something that made me question a little bit, because the punctuation is debated. The earliest manuscripts did not come with our question or quotation marks. We cannot be certain where the imagined opponent's speech ends. But the verb usually in Greek holding the verse together is not debated. For you can see, show. Show here is the verb. Faith is not an option you can replace on a table, because trust lives inwardly. If it is to become visible, something must carry it across the distance between the heart and the world. James called that something works. I will show you my faith by my work. He does not say the work replaces the faith, distracts from the faith, or stands beside it as a second claim on God. The action makes the trust legible. You never see breath by separating it from the body and placing it on a scale. You see the chest rise. The rising of the chest is not evidence added to life from outside, but rather it is life becoming visible. For now, we move to the most important part here for the demons too. Believe and shudder. James uses the creed Israel says every day, the Shema of Israel, that the Lord is one. For his imaginary believer is not a heterodox. James says without irony at all, you do well. Then he gives the same position to the demon, as if the demons also do well. For the demons are not mistaken by who God is. For the first people who recognized the Messiah are demons. But they shudder, bristle, recoil from the divine. The truth reaches their mind and their nerves. It does not become communion at all. This is the limit of defining faith as correct recognition, for rather a demon recognizes. Although Christian truth is not less than something true. Enough to say, James has just praised the statement, but the truth of a Christian that he must confess is also something in the position of that one may recognize that he has to abide in him. And at the same time, he must recognize the Son and the Father. But the information can describe communion in a way too, for that it is said that one must recognize that too, although it cannot substitute for it. So, in a way, the doctrine, or rather the demons, give us precise case. It's a true statement here that they have made. A real reaction of theirs is true, for it is rather truth for them, as in no participation in the divine. Saint Augustine, for instance, he says, when talking about James and Paul in the same sentence, he links that the faith that lives is faith which works by love. The demons believed, they crumbled, they stuttered, and he said, but they do not go into the divine and abide in him and move with him at all through love. And then he protects the other side too, that people would use to say that works are justifiable, or rather something we use to stand in front of God, but works proceed from the faith, not faith from work. Faith, love, work, all are good measures and good ways to show our devotion, but in a way we can look at them as different colors. We do not have to mix different colors together, for the Christian faith usually is a faith that wants the fullest truth of every single piece. He wants the fullness of the faith and the fullness of the work. We do not mix the red and white in order for us to get the pink. Then for the verse 20, but do you want to know, vain man, that faith apart from work is dead? We have some manuscripts that repeat the word dead, and it's arge. It's idle and working, useless as it is translated in some translations, with the deadness here as useless. The word is like a pun. Faith without erga, works, is argi. Faith without erga is argi. It's not working, it's idle. And James calls the person empty because everything so far has contained a form without its reality, a blessing without a gift, belief without communion. It's the whole story manifesting over and over again. Faith without movement. The emptiness is not low intelligence at all. It is the empty space where the neighbor should have been helped. Now James calls two witnesses for his case, and they are interesting, for he picked them for a special reason. For you see, he picked Abraham, our father justified by work. But when you look and observe a little bit, the term that he used for work was someone who was obedient to the Lord, but he did not kill his son. It's in a way something that should change how we view work. For James' supreme example is not a finished product polished, displayed before God, and disposed into a moral statement that is used to frown upon others. It is rather a trust moving far toward God. For the voice of God is the voice that stopped the knife, even though God could have let the knife shed the blood, even though he does not delight in blood at all. Or as the Psalms, for instance, say that God wants a broken heart that comes to him. And you see that Abraham's faith shown, or rather has shown us, in entrusting the promise back to the Creator. That's why. And another reason why James cannot be reduced to performance. If the work must be extremely complete before God, then Abraham fails by that measure, for Abraham was stopped at the last moment. There are people whose love is made difficult to see by illness, depression, fear, poverty, immaturity, or the simple absence of opportunity, and James does not hand us a quota with which to pronounce on them a verdict. For rather, Abraham's interrupted work leaves room for a God who sees direction before reaching a completion. And when you look, you see that faith worked with his work, and by his works faith was perfected. Synergia tois ergois. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but if you read the grammar of the Greek, faith is the subject of the first verb. Faith was working. It's synergia. Faith was working together with the works, and James, in a way, does not picture a dead object called faith being dragged by a second object that is called works. No. Faith itself is like an active force, something like an active act with the deeds in which it becomes visible. For the movement runs back the other way too, through the works. Faith is brought to completion. Faith was perfected, carried toward the end. For Abraham acts because he trusts in the Lord, and this gives us an interesting view, or rather maturity, to look at it. And the breath shows that the body lives, continues on. The importance in this rather is to look at the James first asks whether there is breath, not whether the breathing is athletic. A newborn and a runner do not breathe with equal strength, but both are alive. Maturity can be measured only after life is present, and even then with the crude of arithmetic of a religious lecture. James gives us a pulse before he gives us progress. So the scripture was fulfilled, which says Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him as righteousness. That's Genesis 15. The work has just described comes from Genesis 22. James places 7 chapters between the declaration and its fulfillment. In Genesis 15, Abraham believes a promise he cannot yet see. And Genesis 22, it tells that trust that he had in God, and the trust acquires hands, feet, wood, an altar, and a road to Moriah. The later act does not travel backward in time, but rather it makes the earlier faith a counterfeit, until further notice, while James call it fulfillment. This is where Paul's too enters the room, and where the conversation often becomes smaller than either apostles. Paul picks Genesis 13 for Genesis 15. And as you can see, Genesis 15. And asks whether Abraham forced God, or whether Abraham forced God's promise into the category of wages. Did circumcision make God his debtor? Did the Torah arrive and centuries later create the promise? No, rather, The trust, the one who justifies the ungodly and the promise remains a gift. Does God believed, does, does Abraham believed God remain a sentence about a previous spiritual event, or does the belief live through the test? Paul protects the gift from becoming a wage at all, and James protects the faith from becoming a corpse. Neither cancel the other at all. For when you look at the framing of Genesis 15, and while James lets the story run into Genesis 22, but even that image has limits. Paul also begins and ends Romans with the obedience of faith. James already said that God gives birth by his own will, and grace is not Paul's private subject. Grace as an action is not, or rather, action is not James' private subject. You need to keep both colored and mixed. As Chesterton, for instance, would say, not a compromise in which faith and work are each turned down until nobody is offended. Faith at full maximum capacity and full volume is Abraham genuinely believing in God, and that trust is counted as righteousness. Works at genuinely high, full volume. The trust is fulfillment. Its fulfillment is by being called obedience. The unity is not a negotiated middle, it's organic. The body and its breath remains distinct, as you see. And then you would see that there is this not by faith alone, even though James has spent also the last 10 verses defending the faith that stands alone. It is to say that it says it has faith. It blesses a cold body and the coat and keeps the coat. It says the creed correctly. It shudders with the demons. It asks to be shown while refusing every form in which it could appear, for faith is alive. It can never be just a corpse. It's the gift, the grace that makes us alive. The verb dikaiho can mean justify, declare righteous, vindicate, or show to be in the right, depending on the use. Christians in general have disagreements, and that's fine, but we do not have to settle these disagreements by pretending the verb means nothing. James' point survives. Every responsible rendering for the faith by which a person is justified is not the isolated assent he has just called dead. Nor does he need to become a staged argument between a Protestant and an Orthodox Catholic, with Paul placed behind one table and James on another. For Paul can say that a mountain moving faith without love is nothing, and James can say every good gift and the new birth comes from above. The black or white version is a debate that never really should exist. And you see, there is the use of the Rahab, the prostitute, who was justified by her work, and we can see that she is too mentioned in the lineage of the Messiah. It is not a sanctification of prostitution. James does something more exact. He takes the social identity of the person, strips it away, even though we might look at this and grumble, but rather he says that we are not justified in front of God by our social status. We are not justified by that golden ring or the poor clothing, as if visible size or signs disclosed human worth. James chose a woman, her whole identity was relied or really relived as her past. And he chose the father too of the faith, and said that these examples stand together in the same breath. And I like to go to this, for as the body apart from the spirit is dead, even so faith apart from work is dead. The Greek word is pneuma, spirit, wind, breath. Translations always call it spirit, which is here, pneuma. And a body without breath is not half alive. A body without breath is dead. The body is a full body. The breath is fully a breath, and the living thing exists in their union. This is why the usual arithmetic fails. Faith is not 50% salvation and work remains the 50%. No. Faith corresponds to the whole body too. Works corresponds to the breath by which the body is living. Faith corresponds to the body itself, while works correspond to the breath by which the body is living. For you do not honor the body by removing its breath, so that the body may be alone. You have not purified it, you have killed it. James begins with a person who says he has faith. James begins with a person who says he has faith and ends with a body that has stopped breathing. Between them, he shows us exactly what's gone missing. And that is the most important part. It's not a doctrinal accuracy, it's not a religious language, it's not social respectability. For Rahab has none of it, and James places her beside Abraham. It's not a completed record of achievement. God stops Abraham before the work is finished. What has gone missing is the movement proper to the life God gives. Trust becomes mercy, obedience, communion, and hospitality. In the world of bodies, every good gift, as always, comes from God, from above. God gives birth. Keep that at full volume always. We do not work life into ourselves or made God our debtor. Faith without work is dead. Keep that too as a full volume lesson, for the gift does not become less gracious when it begins to breathe. The body is not the enemy of the breath. The breath is not supplement embarrassed by the body. Faith is not protected by moving or removing the work through which it lives. The work are not exalted by cutting them off from the trust that gives them the direction. The body is alive as long as it is breathing, and for James, the breath of faith is given.